On this case,
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On opening government, we think it's time to end the fetishisation of whiteness that continues in certain societies around the world. The problem the opening government sees is that white should not be perceived as right. That everyone, in every community, should not fetishise the concept of whiteness, and they shouldn't act with regards to changing the way their eyes look through surgery, through whiteness creams, through making decisions for their children about how they should appear with regards to how they succeed. We recognise, Madam Speaker, that race has a deep problem in these societies and the divisions are important. But we say as long as government says you can opt out of your race, that you can try and change your appearance, that you will never change the types of racial preconceptions that exist in communities like Japan and Korea and Indonesia. The solution of the opening government is clear. We would ban all procedures that change race. That includes invasive and non-invasive procedures. That includes changing of eye appearances through surgery. It includes things like whiteness creams. These things are all, no thank you, are all things that are tried to change one's appearance. I have three arguments. Firstly, when does the government act to try and limit supposed self-regarding conduct? Secondly, how this enables race-based discrimination? And thirdly, how do we change aesthetic culture? Firstly, when does government act in this instance? We say that if something can be shown, no thank you, to be harmful to a large group of the population, regardless of someone's individual autonomy or choice to change their own appearance, that government should act to ban it. And there are a couple of reasons why. Firstly, because states are the only ones who can act in this form of instance. We say that game theory exists right now in these sort of populations, that if you don't make the choice to change the appearance of your child in, say, a place like Japan, to make them seem more white, that someone else will do that. So there's a disadvantage for you not moving first to change your appearance, because in these communities, whiteness is seen as more successful as a relationship and an outcome of effectively the white domination in certain areas. Moreover, we say, we don't think we should allow individuals to choose, which then forces a choice onto others in those communities. We think when an individual says, I am going to do this for myself, that could be okay if there's no other influence in that group. But when culture is so fundamentally important and the push to change someone's race is so important, individuals remove that level of choice and have far more societal pressure to make that. No thank you. Thirdly and finally, we think the information is asymmetry here. We think, well, asymmetrical, sorry. We think that communities have a preconception of race, and I'll take you in a second, sir, and we think on our side of the house that states are the only ones who can act. And the best example of that is banning of Holocaust denial or banning of hate speech. Both of those say that individuals shouldn't be able to act that hurts the rest of their own community who didn't necessarily choose to like that in the first place. Yes, Mr. Greenland.
Tim, does gender reassignment surgery attach normative values to gender?
No, what it does, it says if you have a sickness personally, you should be able to change that and cure it if you so wish. We don't think there's a thing called race dysphoria. We don't think people, there isn't. We don't think there is race dysphoria. We don't think people have a mental illness that means they want to change their race. Moving on to my second point about race-based discrimination. No thank you. We think it says on our side of the house with regards to this procedure that it confirms there is a substantial difference between races. It says that you can only make your change, that you can only be better off in society if you're willing to take very invasive procedures to make yourself look different. And we think when governments have been fighting for a very long time to say that race shouldn't be the descriptor of your life, that it shouldn't change the types of opportunities that you have, when the government allows that form of action, we think that's harmful. And in the real world, Madam Speaker, these are people who are choosing to be white. These are people who want to fetishise the concept of being white. And we don't think that white superiority is a good enough, or people's wish to be white is a good enough reason for them to be able to make this choice. Moreover, we'd say, it confirms race-based discrimination in certain communities, because it says you can opt out. You can choose not to be part of the race that is discriminated against. It says that if you have enough money, or if you're willing to go so far, that you are able to make these types of choices to remove yourself. And we think that enables communities to be able to perform levels of racism that we think on our side of the house is fundamentally deplorable. The reason why we think, Madam Speaker, very quickly, this is different to something like cosmetic surgery, which may engender some level of discrimination possibly against ugly people, is that firstly, it can be restorative, Madam Speaker, but secondly, that beauty is subjective and that race is binary, and we think when you make that choice, you make a fundamental difference. And we think the more direct harms with regards to changing your appearance with race, as opposed to making yourself look subjectively more beautiful. And on that apt note, I'll take you, Sheng Wu.
So we will also ban cosmetic surgery in the cases where it's not restorative, but simply expresses my preference to look different.
No, we'd say on our side of the house, we think cosmetic surgery is fundamentally different. I just spent 3 points telling you why they are fundamentally different. Because it's about the level and the outcome with regards to the community. Moving on to my third and final point about aesthetic culture. We think that firstly, governments have to send a clear message that racial movements, that the ability to change your race, shouldn't be accepted. That you should be judged on your character, on your intellect, on your ability, and not your race. And to say that you can change your race for social advantage says that that is something you should be able to do and that race should be taken into consideration. Secondly, it empowers unwilling participants in these procedures. Firstly, what we see a lot of the time is parents performing or getting people to perform surgery on their children to make sure their eyes look more white. So that sort of procedure means that those children can say no. And moreover, it says for those children who are pushing their parents to have this sort of surgery, that surgery is illegal, that you cannot have that surgery, that you won't buy the whitening product, that you won't make those sorts of decisions for your child. Thirdly and finally about aesthetic culture, we say on our side of the house that race has a unique history. We say that people in some communities believe that race describes your whole moral self and the historical self that you have. We say that when you ban this sort of action, you change the way in which people look at race with regards to the way they attract certain levels of characteristics. At the end of this debate, Madam Speaker, well, at the end of my speech, we'd say that all governments have worked incredibly hard to put in things like anti-discrimination legislation, racial equality legislation, that all preferenced on the fact that all races should be treated equally, there shouldn't be levels of discrimination. That is fundamentally based on the fact that race is something you cannot change. When we say it is something you can, we think you undermine that social progress we proudly beg to propose.
Open the case for the opposition.
Madam Chair, seldom have I been so sure that I am right. I was forced as a child to learn the Chinese language. I was forced to learn it right up until the point where I was 18 years old. I protested that this was not my culture, that I didn't feel that Chinese, that I liked books that weren't Chinese books. But I was told that it was my culture, that the government had a right to tell me what I viewed myself as, that I could be told that I should learn Chinese. First I was told, it's your history. It's like, but I don't feel very Chinese. You don't know what Chinese history is. But it's your family. Like my family speaks English at home. Yeah. Then I was told, finally, it's the color of your skin. You will be who you are because the government will view you and lock you in to the color of your skin. And I abhorred that. Yeah. What did we hear from that side? We heard, well, it's really bad when parents force cosmetic surgery on their children to change their race. Yes, we agree. Broadly speaking, it's really bad when parents force non-restorative cosmetic surgery on their children for any reason. And we'd be happy to ban that because we don't think children should have, vastly invasive surgery forced on them for aesthetic reasons. No. Then we were told, but it can be shown to be harmful to large groups, right? The standard utilitarian thing, right? We think that there is a bar according to which you cannot use my personal choices simply to social engineer the greater good. And that bar is when my personal choices affect other people, not by making other options concretely cut off for them, but by influencing their opinions. So for instance, it's not okay for me to slam the door in a theater on fire when other people are trying to escape because they can escape whether or not they like it. No, thank you. but in a situation where my actions influence them, not by reducing the choices they have, right? That side wants to reduce the choices available, but by changing their minds about what they'd like to look like, we think that's fine. We think it's a proper respect for the autonomy of each person to have their own view of beauty and their own view of good life, no thank you, that it can influence them that way. We don't think that's bad. Then we were told, but you know, everybody will change to look like they want to be white. Not true, I'll show you in my case. But fashions change, right? Whitening cream was really popular among American blacks in the 90s. It's much less popular now. People can say they are proud to be black, that they're proud to have dark skin. But part of the reason why that proudness is meaningful is because it's not forced on them by the government, but represents a choice by each individual to be black and proud. Furthermore, even if we lived in that world, even if we lived in the world where everybody systematically wanted to be white, the only circumstances in which everybody would so systematically want to change one race could only be circumstances of such terrible racial oppression that it would be immoral to deny people this escape route. It would be akin, no thank you, to locking people in the Gaza Strip until they make the Gaza Strip better for themselves. That's immoral. What do we bring you today? No. We put to you that we fully support research to increase both the range and lower the cost of, changing the way you look and changing, your apparent race. We think this will be natural as cosmetic surgery progresses. It'll get cheaper and cheaper. That's good. We're okay, furthermore, with subsidizing these race-changing, these appearance-changing procedures in cases where it can be shown that there's a substantial mental health benefit for the person involved. Johnny will cover that because, there are really cases where people do feel substantially psychologically harmed by not being able to change their appearance. What do I want to bring you today? Broadly speaking, 3 points.
Sir.
Right? Their policy would deny a good post-racial future. Second point, their policy is going to intolerably suppress the autonomy of the individual. And thirdly, their policy makes discrimination easier, whereas the provision of this kind of thing will make, the provision of this kind of surgery in your appearance will make discrimination harder. We want a post-racial future, Mr. Speaker. We want a world, hold on a moment, where people choose their race like they can choose their clothes and their occupation. And many people will be happy with the occupational clothes that their parents had. Some people won't. Yes.
Yeah, as long as racial change is viewed as a way to make your life better, is it really a free choice?
Yes, because all kinds of changes are changes to make my life better. I choose my occupation with a view to making my life better. I choose my clothes because I think these clothes will be better than the other clothes on the shelf. Right? The idea that simply choosing to make your life better makes you therefore not free, no thank you, means choosing for a reason makes you unfree, because all choices are based on reasons and what you think will make your life better. Furthermore, if you think that this is going to make your life better, that's a great thing, because when you can choose how you look, then people will know that merely by seeing what race someone looks like won't link to any particular characteristic that they have deep down inside, no thank you, that they can genuinely look past your skin color and your eye size to see your personality and your intelligence and what you are like as a person. It enables people to escape the tyranny of biology that forces on them particular preconceptions. We're massively happy with that. But secondly, we put to you that this, no thank you, denies my right to choose what I think is the good life. And it's not just about people choosing to be white, right? Ganguro girls in Japan choose to tan their skin. They choose to look black. They choose to make their hair look curly. And the reason for that is because they subscribe to a social ideal which they associate with being black, of being carefree, of playing music. And it may be that this is, to some extent, something of their own construction, that this isn't entirely true of all black people we accept. No, thank you. But it's part of their view of how they can create a community within themselves of expressing and endorsing their own view, their own personality. And that's massively important. We think it's intolerable to hijack, no thank you, their hopes and dreams on the cause of social engineering, to use them as a battering ram for your view of how Japanese people should look. We think, no thank you, that in these cases it's immoral not to let them change. But thirdly, we put to you, convergence in looks is great, because if everybody looks similar, it's much harder to discriminate against any individual race, right? Partly decoupled how you look and who you are inside. And most people care about who you are inside. And their policy as a result, the government dictates that race is essential to you. That it's something that you could never change. No, thank you. They say race is a big part of your moral history. It's not a big part of mine. Why should you force me, no thank you, to make it a big part of mine? We put to you that this sort of very behavior essentializes people. It makes people feel that they can't choose to be anything but the kinds of things that wider society, and very often the government, associate with their race. That's massively damaging. It means that you can't choose. You can, if you're a white person, choose different shades of white. You can, if you're a white person, choose different white eye colors. But black people can't choose these shades of white. Black people can't choose the white-eye colors. Why? Because they were born black. Because their skin is a different color to start with. That's abhorrent. Any policy that says your ability to select, say, what clothes you wear, what shade your face is, what color your hair is, on the basis of your race, on the basis of characteristics that you never chose, that you may not feel a particular affinity for, some people will feel a particular affinity for, but not everybody, that's abhorrent. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, many people choose to live in their hometown. Many people choose to move. For the people who choose to live in their hometown, that's well and good. But communities don't own people. They don't own them for the use of battering rams and social engineering to make life better. That's why you can't force people not to move and be part of your community. That's why you can't force them to take the race that the government sees you as having. For those three reasons, we think their case falls. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we invite Amit to continue the case for the government.
Madam Speaker, members of this House, the reason Sheng Wu was annoyed when he was a child was because the government made assumptions about race that were homogenous, and that is exactly what the opening opposition have done and encouraged people to do. They have said that race gives you difference, and you can access that difference with a procedure or with a creed, without analysing the fact that there is no difference apart from the visual difference of race, but people will think they get something else. That's the problem with encouraging people to do their life. He didn't hate it because he learned another language. He hated it because the government locked him into something because of his skin colour. We think that all you do is encourage that because you allow the assumption of superiority and inferiority by telling people they should change themselves. 3 points of rebuttal. Firstly, if this is a choice, how dare we judge what people choose? It is not a choice, ladies and gentlemen, when every single person who faces the choice views this as a choice between improving your life and not. It is never a choice for those people. We don't think that's the reality of their choice, but that is the way they approach this particular choice. Because what you're saying is everyone should do this. Because if you can make your life better by widening your eyes or whitening your skin, it is unbelievable not to. But many people won't, and it's them who will be worse off in this debate. But we think that people shouldn't only be proud of their race if they chose it. That's a frightening conception that relies on every single person on earth being able to perfectly craft themselves and only then being proud of their race. People should be proud of their race because race is unimportant, ladies and gentlemen. Skin colour is unimportant. No, thank you. People shouldn't only be proud of how they look if they constructed it, because you can't perfectly construct how you choose and how you choose not to. We have the comparison, ladies and gentlemen, between clothes and a job. You can change those things to improve yourself, so why can't you change your race? Firstly, I can change my clothes and my job back if I don't like them. It's really hard to unwhiten your skin, and we think that if people are having to constantly change with their appearance to be happy, that points to a problem in the system. That problem is that people are told that being a certain skin colour will mean that you're a different person. That's what's guaranteed under the opposition's view of the world, because they say that you get a different life if you're a different skin colour. That's what we're worried about on the government side of the house, the connection between colour and substantive moral difference and action in your life. Secondly, clothes and jobs are pluralistic. There are different conceptions of what good and bad clothes are. Sadly, the majority of the real world says it's better to be white. It's not. We're not that great, but here's the sad truth. A lot of the world thinks it's better to be white. That's the difference. There's no fashion. Things are not going to change drastically as long as white people are seen as dominant. There isn't a pluralism of choice, unlike with clothes and jobs. And finally, unlike with clothes and jobs, when you make a choice to change your race, you're making a choice for everyone of your original race, because you're pressuring them to do the same, because you've improved yourself, because you are now looking whiter, you have bigger eyes, and they have to too, to compete with you for jobs, to compete with you for social acceptance. That's why we think it actually removes choice. Second point of rebuttal, self-improvement. It is immoral to deny people the capacity to improve themselves. We've told you substantive differences already between other forms of self-improvement. But when it is the procedures themselves that cause the demand for the procedures themselves, we have significant problems. We're not saying that these procedures are the source of racism. We're saying in this context, when the government is fighting on so many fronts to reduce racism and reduce perceptions of racial difference, if you give people a way of saying no, racial difference does exist, it is absolute, it is a moral and substantive way to change your life, all of those governmental policies are eroded. That's why it's not locking people in Palestine, ladies and gentlemen, because the very enabling of this procedure is what creates demand on for this procedure because you tell them that being white is better. No thank you. Lastly, post-racial world, which was Sheng Wu's argument along Obama's lines, but not. We heard, ladies and gentlemen, that if we all look more similar to each other, it's harder to discriminate against you. No, it's not if you don't look more similar. If you're one of the people that still can't afford all the treatments, you are worse because you haven't, according to the opposition, you have elected to remain black and you deserve everything that goes with that. That is frightening, Sheng Wu, but I'll take the point from your closing.
How is this different to religious conversion?
Yeah, this is different to religious conversion because it's much, much harder to reverse, and because unlike religious conversion, people assume wholehearted things about you that they can see based on your race. That encourages people to do this. You don't have to tell people your religion, so there isn't the same pressure to convert to make your life better, but there is pressure to widen your eyes to get a job in South Korea. That's why it's different. Two positive arguments while I calm the fuck down. First positive argument, psychological problems. We think many of the people who are going to try to access this are not living in Sheng Wu's land of perfect autonomy and choice. They're living in the real world where the reason they go towards these procedures is because they're unhappy with themselves and they think they can make a better life by changing their appearance. But just like everyone else, just like my partner, changing how you look doesn't change who you are. Sorry, it was originally a woman. No. We think that people who have depression and anxiety form a significant proportion of the people who will try to access these particular procedures, especially if the procedures are allowed to develop where they get better and better. Because what you do when you allow these procedures is you encourage the non-diagnosis of the actual causes of anxiety and depression. You say the reason you're unhappy is because you haven't just chosen the best version of your appearance, so you should try. You should try to perfect your appearance because that's the right way to do it. You tell people that if they feel like their appearance is making them sad, that feeling is normal and is to be solved by changing your appearance. That's the problem with the opposition's model. By comparing this to jobs and clothes, you fetishize race and appearance to the point where it is substantive moral difference, where it is about a different life, and that's what makes people look for that rather than the real psychological help that they need. My final argument is about racial interaction. We think one of the most frightening parts of the opening opposition's approach to this debate is what it does for people who don't change their skin colour. I've already told you about black people who, for example, won't be able to access this and are going to be told that they chose not to access this. I'm really worried about what is going to happen to white people when they are confirmed that they are the right kind of race. Everything that is happening in Southern America, where people are told they're inherently God-given better because they're white, is confirmed when everyone tries to start looking like you. When everyone is told that you can improve your life by looking just like this, but maybe with a smaller nose. We think that you are confirming the bias that people have towards themselves and their colour when a whole swathe of people, whether we like it or not, are going to try to become white if this technology improves, when they're already trying to become white by using skin creams in Malaysia and Indonesia. We think it confirms the hierarchy and tells the people at the top they are at the top. That means when you have different racial interaction, people are judged for not being more like you. That means when you have someone in an interview and they don't have eye-widening surgery, you are judging them because they have chosen to do that and to look different. And you can legitimately say, well, my clients might not like this. They could have chosen to look different. I will not hire you. We are worried about the outcomes for racial interaction if you confirm a hierarchy by allowing people to change. The biggest problem with the opening opposition, the biggest problem with the status quo that we want to change, is the ascription of immovable characteristics to race. As soon as you tell people that it's not just in your mind the differences in race, but they're in your eyes, that's when you have all the problems of racism that we're trying to avoid, and that is why the motion stands.
To continue for Oxford.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, it's not important, don't worry. Ladies and gentlemen, I've certainly learned something new about Tim, but this is an outrageous policy. It's an outrageous policy because beneath it lies a mendaciousness on prop side. That they have tried to convince you that they are the ones
that don't care about race, that they are the ones that defend the message that race doesn't matter. That is a lie, Madam Speaker. It is a lie because where on our side we say individuals can choose whether race matters or not to them, they say that it must be so important to you what current race you are that you're not allowed to change it. We say that is centralising race. That is telling people that race is so important, not what we do. We say that their whole thing, this sends out a message that it's much, much better to be white, was very, aggressively said, but incredibly thin on the ground, right? It's based upon the idea that when some people take up a choice, that sends out an incredibly big symbolic message throughout society that convinces and indeed oppresses all of the rest of us into being convinced that that is the right way to live. No! Lots of people take up choices in life, in society, okay? That doesn't make me think that I have to do the same. Because I, unlike First Prophet would see, accept that I can be different to other people. And we think that is a fundamental thing here. What did they say? They said, it will just be a cosmetic change, it won't have a real effect. Well, it will, Madam Speaker, to those people who get beaten up because they are currently black in societies where there is extreme racism. Now, that won't happen to them. We think that's a good effect. We also say it will have a big effect to those who have psychological disorders related to what their current skin colour is, as I'll talk about in more importance. Then they said, no thank you, that the problem with this is it's really hard to change it back if you don't like it. Well, that surely accepts that changing your race might be an important decision. Okay, under our policy you might be able to only change it once, but under your policy, you can't change it at all. So you must be worse under their policy than under ours. Then it says, it tells others that they have to do the same. Rubbish! When cosmetic surgery is legalised, the fact that some people use it doesn't tell me that I have to use it, okay? I don't believe that at all. Nor does gender reassignment surgery by any men or women tell other men or women, no thank you, that they should all change their sex as well. That'd be a weird world, wouldn't it? We say that is a ridiculous idea. People are very able when they take up choices to say this is the right choice for me, not the right choice for everyone. And if they don't, that is a problem with that person, not the fact that that choice exists. No thank you. Then they say that, we're telling them that they have to be better. No, we tell them they can decide. It is you, proposition bench, that tells people that they must stay the way they are to be better. Whereas we give them the choice to decide whether to stay the way they are or to whether to change. That is empowering people. That is saying race is not that important, not forcing them to remain the way in which they are born. No way. Contradiction as well, Madam Speaker. Because on the one hand they said this is a really dangerous choice, it will have a big effect on your life, while at the other time claiming that race has no effect on your life. I don't think they can hold both of those principles at once. No thank you. So let's also deal with in my two substantive points, some of the ignorance of first proposition. Because my first point, it has two titles. The first is Race and Subject Relations Theory in Winnicottian Psychoanalytic Theories of Psychological Development. Or, if you prefer, why some people do have race dysphoria. No, thank you. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the kind of societies where these might be widespread and why it's not okay to use people to generate social change, no thanks, in society. So psychological problems, okay? Proper just ignorant, okay? They clearly don't realise that many people in society, sure, a tiny minority in relation to all of us, but many people, no thanks, suffer from conditions that relate to their race, okay? We say, why might this happen, okay? They didn't give you any reason to believe these people don't exist, they just asserted. They said, oh, there's a thing as basis for it, what a ridiculous idea, right? Let's show you why, okay? Because people often suffer traumatic experiences in childhood, okay? No thank you. If they're exposed to a traumatic incident, for example, being beaten up as a young child because of their race, having slants thrown at them because of their race, or witnessing, say, a beating up of their parents or something like that, that can easily root problems in their psychology with their own skin colour, okay? It can mean that they suffer enormous, no thank you, psychological problems in their life for that skin colour. That does result, Madam Speaker, it does happen, and it results in often self-abuse by these people, okay? Where they try to damage their own skin because they hate it. It's a wide problem, no thank you, that is dealt for by the Centre on Racial Disorders in the Association for Group and Individual Psychotherapy in the UK. We say those kind of problems are life-changing, life-changing for those people, okay? I do know a lot about this. Right. Because they know, thank you. We say, why on earth would we deny that for some people this could be the most effective form of treatment? No. Why would we force them to undergo therapy when it's often ineffective and doesn't work? Okay? Why would you not allow them to take the choice that for many people might prevent self-harm to themselves and also might prevent externalized aggression? Because there is the phenomenon of people who take out their self-loathing of their race on other people of the same race. Okay? Why would we not allow a procedure which treats that disorder when we allow gender reassignment surgery, when we allow all kinds of medical treatments to fix every other kind of disorder, and when we allow surgery for basic cosmetic effects, right? We allow people to say that the size of my nose really matters to me. Why wouldn't we allow them to do it about the skin colour of the colour of their skin? Go.
Sir, please balance the proportion of people with racial dysphoria to the proportion of people who are depressed and want to change their bodies to be happier.
Well, it's probably smaller. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't treat them. Like, why on earth would that hold? Like, the fact that there are, you know, I don't know, like 1% of people with this disease and 5% of people with your disease doesn't mean that we only deal with the majority or a particular position. No. Right, so why also is this bad for society? Because the other argument they make, no thanks, is that this is really important because communities of people will really suffer when these ideas are spread. Well, as we said, we don't think that the status quo necessarily pervades these ideas. I don't hear of anyone in society who ever says that, oh God, you know, the existence of some people getting, you know, race reassignment surgery or whatever is really creating big problems for me. I have no awareness of that problem. But even if there were that problem, okay, why is it not okay to force me to stay white or force someone to stay black to cure, I don't know, racism in the rest of society, right? Well, first of all, because races don't own people, right? I don't think that because I am white, other people who are white have greater rights over me. That somehow I need to stay white in order to protect their rights. I think that's an outrageous view when we would not accept that for any other social group in society. The other idea is it rests upon a false equation of future effects with current effects. We know that these people want this now, okay? We know that they want it and that they think they will get benefits from it now. And we know that in a lot of cases they will get tangible medical benefits for it now. Whereas the importance of these people staying the way they are for the future progress of society and race is unbelievably vague, right? It's an incredibly tenuous causal link, right? I have no reason to tell a person who really wants to change the colour of their skin that no, it is vital that you stay the way you are in order for social attitudes to change. And in any case, I don't see why society would have the right to say that, would have a right to claim that kind of ownership over someone who wanted to excuse themselves from fundamental harms in society that they believe are important. We empower people, they tell them how to be. I'm very proud of them.
On this paper.
Madam Speaker, members of this House, we've heard a lot about the individuals involved in today's debate and the effects on them. We at Team Queensland want to look at the more specific race-wide, nationwide and international effects of this proposal, of allowing, racial change procedures. I want to look at two key issues. Firstly, I want to talk about the difference between racial cosmetic surgery, other types of cosmetic surgery and other kinds of decisions people make and why this is unique and why it's not okay. Secondly, I want to look at how this justifies and encourages racism specifically with respect to women and racial minorities, which we think are two key groups that haven't been dealt with in today's debate. I'm going to deal with rebuttal interspersed in there. You should look out for it. It's going to be fun. So on the first issue of the difference between racial cosmetic surgery and other types of surgery, and things like decisions about your clothing or about the size of your nose or about your gender, because we want to deal with this comprehensively. Because the question is, why do people enter into cosmetic surgery, elective cosmetic surgery? And the answer is, Madam Speaker, because they want to fix something about themselves, because they think their nose is too big and they think it needs to be fixed, because they think they have a little bit too much fat around their hips and they think that that needs to be fixed, Madam Speaker. We think the same perception is created about this type of surgery. It sends the message that this is something that firstly can be fixed, which we all think has already been dealt with, but secondly is something that should ever be fixed, or something that is fix-worthy, Madam Speaker. And we think that that is not just something that is bad for the psychology of the person who undergoes that procedure. We think it sends a message that one race is superior to another race. We think it sends the message that one race needs to be fixed and another race doesn't need to be fixed. No, thank you. Just like you use cream on a blemish on your face, Madam Speaker, this is the same kind of procedure that we're talking about here. We don't think it's acceptable for governments to endorse that message to populations within their country. Moreover, we say that what happens when this surgery is allowed is significantly detrimental, right? Like, they told us a small proportion of people have race dysphoria, and that's a big problem. We're going to look at that later, but we'd say even if that small group of people exists, the wider ramifications are so significant that we overrule their rights in this case. Why? Because when this surgery is allowed, the companies and the people that perpetrate this surgery have a financial incentive to encourage people, no thank you, to take up that look. People like models who have to be on the cutting edge of what is fashionable and what is attractive. When we saw these kind of things coming into Japan at first, Madam Speaker, we saw the fashion industry taking them up first, and that caused a society-wide shift in favour of that as the perception and the dominant perception of beauty. We think these companies use money to pressure people into accepting that as what is beautiful and what is different. No, thank you. And the problem with everything you've heard from the opening opposition is that it accepts this stereotype that has been put forward by those people. We say when you don't allow that stereotype to be put forward in the first place, you don't cause the kind of problems with people wanting to change that they talk about. No, thank you. We'd say that this reinforces the perception in wider society that that is what's beautiful and that is what's important. No, thank you. So what did we hear from the opening government on this issue? And I want to talk about it in order. Firstly, we heard, no, thank you, we're preventing individual liberty because people should be able to choose. Firstly, and we want to make this really clear, for the vast majority of people who engage in this is not a free and fair decision that they are making. They told us, Madam Speaker, that people are being beat up in the streets and that's why they should choose their race. No, thank you. We are here to tell you, Madam Speaker, on this side of the House, that we have to make race not an issue anymore. We have to remove the issue of race, no thank you, and not tell people that if you're being beat up by racist hicks, you should change your skin colour, Madam Speaker.
You never establish any causal logic by which your policy helps attitudes towards racism. And all of your arguments also incidentally apply to wigs. Are you going to ban them as well because they tell everyone who's bald that they have to have hair?
This is the longest point of information ever. Okay, on the first half of that very long point of information, we say, and I'm going to deal with this later, that if beating people up in your community encourages them to become white, we think this encourages racists to beat people up in their communities. But moreover, we say that, like, no thank you, yet again, your like frivolous examples about wigs and clothing are not applicable here. We say race is something that people are significantly discriminated, beat up on the streets as you told us for. This is something people need to take a stand about. Governments cannot condone the message, no thank you, that one is better than the other, Madam Speaker. Moreover, no thank you, we say that if you are talking about minority groups in countries, and I'm going to deal with this later, this doesn't give those people a choice because it indicates to them that the only thing they can do, no thank you, is be racially homogenous, which they told us was going to be so wonderful. We don't think it's wonderful for those people who don't choose to be racially homogenous. No thank you. Secondly, they told us about problems like gender dysphoria and how that exists in race dysphoria. We say we don't allow people to have surgery to deal with their psychological problems in the vast majority of cases. No thank you, I know gender dysphoria is different, I'm getting to it. Things like people who have phantom limbs, who want to cut off those limbs, we don't let them do that, Madam Speaker. Why? Because they're a psychological solution to their psychological problems. And because they're a more significant social harm. We've seen studies occur in America where self-hating black men were dressed up as white men, allowed to experience that, then went through counselling. All of those people came out the other side being grateful that they were black African-American men, Madam Speaker. We think in the vast majority of cases these things can be dealt with therapy. For those who don't know, thank you, the social harm of saying one race is worse than another is more significant. Then they told us, no thank you, that we're the racists because we are the people forcing people to stay in their race. No, we are the ones who are not pressuring people to change their race, no thank you, because we create a social paradigm when that is the only choice that they have. It's never been, no thank you, it's never been adequately addressed by them why people would want to change their race in a system where they weren't encouraged to do that and where society didn't expect them to do that. Secondly, on why this encourages and justifies racism, and particularly racism with respect to women and racial minorities. We say that what this is racism. It is preferring one race to another, and we think on a principled level we have to take a stance against that kind of racist behaviour. They told us that where people are beaten up, they need to be white. No, we need to change the perception in those communities, and we need to protect the people in those communities who are not willing to pander to the racists who bash them on the streets. Moreover, specifically we say with respect to minority groups, it forces them in nations around the world where they are in minorities to change their race to conform to the standard that exists in that country. We don't think that that's acceptable, particularly for those groups who are already discriminated against and underrepresented. Moreover, we also say this discriminates more broadly against women. We say women are more typically stereotyped into what is beautiful and more typically forced to engage in what is considered to be beautiful. That's why we see Japanese women engaging in this surgery significantly more than men. We see this discriminates against those women too. We are proud to propose this motion.
Okay, and now Sam from Sydney, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does telling somebody that they cannot change their identity and their perception of themselves help them? No, it does not. Does it help other people? No, it does not. But even if it did, Madam Speaker, it is wrong to limit the rights of those people in the first place. How do we move away, because this is the burden that Prop wanted to talk about, right? How do we move away from race as identity? We do several things. Firstly, we don't use individuals as the vehicles to do that. Secondly, we have to demonstrate that race is a choice, is a performance, is subjective, is constructed, not a natural fetishization of chart. Madam Speaker, we have to permit a spectrum of racial expression. How did we move away from gender bias, Madam Speaker? How did we move away from sexism? By sending the message that gender does not define who you are. You are not who you are because of your gender. First, some rebuttal. They say that they don't send the message that, oh, race can be fixed. We say the problem is, Madam Speaker, that what that feeds into is race is who you are, it is inherent to you. What that means, Madam Speaker, is that what they allow is that extension of rhetoric of racial difference. It allows groups who say races are inherently different and it's better to be white. No, thank you. Why? Because no one else now can ever be white. No one else can be like we are. We are different and we are better. If you want a social message that changes, you have to change that. They said it's not a free and fair decision. We'd say two responses to that. Firstly, if you are being judged because of the colour of your skin, why do you have no right to escape that judgment and to escape the consequences of that judgment? We have never heard why it's okay to fix people because, Madam Speaker, unfortunately in the real world, you are judged on the basis of the colour of your skin, and that is something that they did not want to deal with. They wanted to condemn people to perpetually be judged by the colour of your skin. We're going to talk in a moment about how you change racial discourse. So, no, it doesn't stop racism. How do we know that? Because up till now it's been very difficult to change your race cosmetically, Madam Speaker, and we still see racism. It's not by the fact that over the past millennia no one's been able to change their race. The racism has gone away. More to the point, it was only when changing gender reassignment surgery, which we asked about in the point of information, which is, by the way, just as hard to reverse, just as risky, just as physically difficult, probably just as expensive. It's only when that came into play, Madam Speaker, we accepted that gender is a spectrum and people have the right to move along that spectrum. That sexism ceased to be part of that decision. Go on, then.
Yeah, it's possible that that happened because of gender reassignment surgery, or was it instead massive government policy that didn't allow people to opt out of difference?
No, it was by the fact of saying you don't have to act like a man, even if you're a woman, in order to succeed in a man's world. It's by saying that gender's different, but more importantly, it's because we allow you to define who you want to be and how you want to display your gender, rather than saying that there are only certain ways in which you can do that. Lastly, no thank you. A little bit of response to opening. Firstly, this idea that there is no racial dysmorphia was dealt with very effectively. But crucially, we don't hold gender relations, don't hold people hostage to gender relations. We recognise they live in a world where race is judged. Secondly, this notion that race is binary, again, I've dealt with that by saying it feeds into the racist rhetoric, Madam Speaker. And lastly, from a myth, this idea that it confirms hierarchy. This is where I'm going to move into my substantive material. We say it de-essentialises race. It allows race to have subjective meaning. It allows me to put my own meaning on my race. So, what do we have under their model? We have essentially, Madam Speaker, it's my first substantive point, that the state defines natural racial identities. It says you are who you are and you can't change that visible factor. And sadly, Madam Speaker, we do live in a world where what you look like does affect how people judge you. More importantly, it doesn't just fix those racial identities, it asks you to cede control of that part of your identity to the state, Madam Speaker, rather than being allowed, no thank you, to move within the spectrum. And interestingly, what we see particularly, again with gender reassignment surgery, as we see not only that society is happier now with people taking different gender identities physically as well as in performance, Madam Speaker, we also see rises in things like androgyny and so on. We find that all of these are acceptable. What this moves away from is a notion that there are only certain types of gender expression. We believe that it will be excellent when we move away from the idea that there are only certain types of races. I've already pointed out how people are judged. If you are judged as a function of your race, you have to be allowed to escape that judgment. Because, Madam Speaker, we believe that only this post-racial society that these guys want to access will be created when race is deconstructed as performance, not as inherent to yourself. No, thank you. This message that you can change your race by changing your appearance, we believe, is fundamentally valuable in that sense. Because what it says is that it's not something you were born with. It's not something that nature imposed upon you, which is, and the reason why this is crucially important, is because that is the rhetoric of the racist. That is the rhetoric that says you, because of the colour of your skin, are physically, mentally inferior to me. No, thank you. We say that if what you allow people to do is to say, well, by changing the colour of my skin, do I change those those other factors? Of course you don't. That would be stupid. What that therefore does is demonstrate the essential stupidity of racial rhetoric, which is fundamentally important if we want to destroy racism, no thank you, within our society. Because this leads me to my final question, Madam Speaker. How do we move away from a society in which race is judged? Because that really is the burden on that side. If we accept that it doesn't change, that we should allow you to construct your identity, how do we change society? And the answer is you do not do it by making individuals the vehicle of your policy. That is fundamentally an abrogation of their rights and an abrogation of the state's responsibility. But more importantly, Madam Speaker, it is by demonstrating to every individual in society that race is not important. And how do we demonstrate that race is not important? By simply showing how easy it is for race to change. By demonstrating that moving from one to another is that easy. It shows that it is something superficial and only superficial. It shows that it's not to do with your physical characteristics, that your physical characteristics and your mental ability and your physical ability have nothing to do with the colour of your skin. Madam Speaker, they wanted to talk about a post-racial society by telling people that race is fixed, is inherent, tells you who you are. That is never going to change.
And now, Lauren, to close the case for the government, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of this august house, it said a lot in debating, but honestly, this time I'm serious. I think what they just said was really offensive. Because when they told us that their model, where it's a free-for-all, will allow you to define your race, they were obviously just ignoring the minutes of substantive material they'd had earlier, where they told you that people would get beat up and discriminated against if they didn't define their race the way we wanted them to. Let's be clear here, we're not allowing them to define their race however they want. We're saying there's a way to define your race the way we want you to define it, and we're going to push you that way, and if you don't define your race that way, we will continue to discriminate against you. The onus they put upon us was like, well, if you can't prove that discrimination will be solved, then you lose. No, the purpose of this debate is that they make discrimination worse. They entrench it, they reinforce it, and that's the harm of the status quo that we want to undermine. No, thank you. I want to look at the three important things in today's debate. Firstly, no, thank you. Who is making race important and entrenching discrimination, which is what we move to later in this debate. Secondly, what is the difference between this and other harmful types of cosmetic surgery, which means it cannot remain an individual right? And finally, why does this entrench racism in particular for minority groups in communities? So if we start with which team is entrenching a racial culture that cannot be overcome, which is what we move to. No, thank you. The first question I want to ask here is, in what world will it become unimportant? Because this was the catch cry of Prozac. We say, why would you bother to change your race if it's true that it was unimportant? The whole basis of changing your race is that it is important. That's the only logical reason why you would spend tens of thousands of dollars changing it. So in a world where you have to change your race and it's like an important aspect of your life, there is no way it's going to become less important. Secondly on that, they said if it's easy to change, that makes it unimportant. Just because it's easy if you spend like lots and lots of money does not make it unimportant if people have to do it. Moreover, what they missed here was it's a one-way street. It's not becoming less important important unless people are moving both ways. And what we told you in today's debate is that this isn't like a cultural intermingling where some people are choosing to look a bit Asian and some people are going Indian. It's a one-way street. It's not becoming less important, it's becoming more important that we all go, no, thank you. Moreover, it was a stab in the back of their front half who was like, convergence is great. If this is really going to be a marketplace of culture, how are we converging? No, thank you. The next thing they said here, well, the next question I want to ask here is what justifies demanding a change of identity? Under what condition can racist people demand that you change your identity? We say, what we told you at closing was, we say it's in a world where you are opting into your culture and they can vilify you for continuing to opt into your culture. No, thank you. Moreover, we say it's based on an idea that it's something that should be changed. Just like you should have a bigger breast size or smaller hips. It's a blemish culture and ideology that we want to remove. So we say that's a big problem with what they were saying. Now finally here, we heard, well, it's government control of race. Government doesn't control your race. Who are they kidding? It's genetic. You're born of a race. No, thank you. So this idea that the government's locking you into something, the whole problem with this debate is that they think it's a cage that you're locked into. It's not. We're fighting against that. They only entrench that. Second of all, government didn't create anything. You were born that way. The second issue in today's debate, why is this different and therefore more harmful, which allows the restriction of autonomy here where we don't allow it with other types of surgery? Now, what we told you is, at Team Queensland is, the psychology of you have to fix it is particularly damaging here because it's a race. It's not like it's in like with a big nose. People in different races everywhere have big noses, right? Some people have big noses, some people have small. The problem with race is, when you decide you're black but you want to be white, that is a statement about all other black people out there. That demeans your entire race because you are making a statement that you think that your race is not as good as that other race. So we say the harms are much larger than normal cosmetic surgery when you decide you want smaller hips. Yes?
Let's suppose we both walk into a cosmetic store and the clerk tells me that you can buy whitening cream and I can't because I'm too yellow. How is that anything but government-sponsored racism?
You don't get it. The whitening cream is a big jar of racism that says being white is good and being Asian and yellow is not. And the government is banning that big jar of racism and that makes them not racist. Was, it's a choice. You're making that decision. We have a few responses to that. Firstly, everyone who gets left behind in, say for instance, the black community, their choice is invalidated by every new person who moves out of that community and accepts the underlying premise of whitening procedures that say that white is better. So it's not your choice, it makes everyone else do the same thing. Secondly, we got no response to our analysis of why the pressure would only get worse with time. What we told you is cosmetic surgery is a lucrative market and this market will advertise and put stuff in magazines to make you feel like you're not a good person unless you become white. So they're creating demand in a market which will only make this problem worse, not better. Now the next thing we heard was this is all about mental health. We're just going to have to help people. Firstly, we say, unlike gender dysmorphia, there are not 4-year-olds who wake up and say, I really believe I'm a white person. Honest, Mum and Dad. What that tells you is that these mental disorders are being created by external forces of discrimination. How do you get rid of those external forces of discrimination? Maybe not by endorsing the premise, which is that white people are better. Now, finally, on entrenching racism towards important groups like minorities, who we do think are crucial in today's debate. We told you that their logic, that it was fashion cultures and convergence was great because there'd be less discrimination, is particularly harmful here. There will be less discrimination in countries like minorities because there will be no one left to discriminate against because they will all be forced to abandon their own culture in favour of the majority's culture. We say that the pressures that we've all talked about in today's debate are particularly harmful in countries with persecuted minorities that think that this is a way out when it's not. Of course, the problems of discrimination in society continue, and of course both sides want to deal with those problems, but we will never deal with them by reinforcing a mentality that says that white is superior, that what people who are doing of minorities should be doing is opting out of their culture and becoming white, and then the problem will be solved, and blaming them when they don't opt out of their better culture for that decision, and so we stand in proud opposition.
And finally, Daniel, to close the case for Sydney, please.
I have two very simple questions. Do I own my racial identity, or does my state? Question number two. How best do we reduce racism? By arguing that race has meaning that is natural, unchangeable, and fixed, or arguing that it's something contrived, subjective, and personal? We would argue that in this debate what we're doing is changing race. We're showing that it's a genetic fiction, and we're showing that you shouldn't fetishize race as a part of your body as opposed to anything else. And of course, Lauren, people that adopt our proposal and our model in this debate think race is important. But they think race is important in a different way to racists think race is important. They think race is important as something that is just about personal to them and their construction of their own personal meaning. And we think that is something that fundamentally changes our conception of race and changes it for society for the better. Let's move to the first question about who owns my racial identity. And what we'd say that when Tim stood up here, what he said that he absolutely wanted to stop was the fetishizing of racial identity. But we'd say in this debate he makes it so much worse. When he distinguishes changing your body because it makes you unhappy for other reasons than for the motive of changing your race. He says that particular things about my physicality are unimportant, particular things that denote race and signify race are important, and therefore the state has a right to legislate over them. What we say you do there is you assign normative values to race, and you signify my body in a particular way that I did not consent to. And we think that is unacceptable within this debate. We think race has been proven by scientists to be a genetic lie. It doesn't has any link to your intelligence, or your attributes, or your dignity, or your selfhood. We instead should recognise that and not perpetuate that it's connected to this. No, thank you. Sit down. What we say is that we are going to change that within this debate. But furthermore, we turn all the way down the line, especially in closing, they presume to know the motives of the people that are making this choice. As if the reason they're doing this is because they hate their race and they hate people involved in it. No, thank you. We think there are some people who live in Asian societies that choose to become more Asian because that's what they traditionally approve on. Shane, we told you about people that no thank you in black communities that want to be more black and not less. So we don't think it's true, Lauren. This is a one-way street. But even if it isn't, we think that people can assign and construct their personal significance to their own racial identity. The state shouldn't say, we think you should think this about your race and nothing else. That's unacceptable, and we don't stand for that on the opposition bench within this debate. We don't think the state has the right to construct that in a particular way and signify my body in this particular way. No, thank you. Lauren was wrong when she said the government doesn't create anything in this debate. You were born with it. It's what you were born with. No, but it signifies that that particular thing I was born with, as opposed to any other part of my physicality that I was born with, is more important and owned by the state. That's unacceptable within this debate. No, thank you. Their treatment of transgenderism all the way down the bench, like fraught philosophical problems in the proposition bench in this debate. Because first of all, they tried to show, no, thank you. They couldn't deny that it was different in terms of surgical consent. All they tried to do was say, number one, less people suffer from this disorder, which was absurd. As we heard from opposition bench, that doesn't mean we don't help people with that particular psychological disorder. No, thank you. What we heard from closing was that this shame is the product of external or internal forces. If that were true, then we would not allow people that develop gender dysmorphia after puberty from gaining that surgery. And we don't do that. We recognise this as a different class of gender dysmorphia. We don't presume why people feel the way they do about their gender. We think it's wrong to fetishise race in a different way than we treat gender. Opening.
So, eye-widening surgery is most prolific in South Korea and Japan. Have they moved to a post-racial society, or have they just entrenched whiteness?
No, what we think is that when you say this practice throughout society, you can do that, and you can change norms about race the same way we change norms about gender. What we think is that you make that so much worse when you say that some identities are prohibited to people, no thank you, and there is a significance to race beyond what I think my racial identity is. When you say there's an external significance, you support racism. We think that no thank you, this wasn't the same as body dysmorphia. On the spectrum of body dysmorphia to gender identity disorder, we think it's closer to this side of the problem. No, thank you. When people think that because of their identity they were born with, and the significance imposed on by external forces, they are unhappy to be who they are. What are the consequences of if we ban gender reassignment surgery? We think that people who are unable to change their genders in the past we've known have committed suicide. No, thank you. Let's recognise this is a marginal proposal. It's not everyone in these societies, even where it's legal, want to suddenly go around and change their race. no thank you. What we think that shows that these people that are going to these lengths to spend all this money, go to all this effort, are clearly very unhappy with their racial identity. It's unacceptable, no thank you, for them to presume why they want that change. Why can't we presume the motives of people who go about this change? It's not necessarily saying that race is something to be fixed. We can offer people that want to, no thank you. The idea of your skin being light, for example, in the Indian subcontinent, connoted wealth rather than race. And we think those people, when they want whiteness, are sending a different message to those around them. We think they should be able to construct that identity in their own particular way. No thank you. We don't think that in this debate we can essentialise race as the state on behalf of individuals. Let's move on to the second question about how we reduce racism. No, thank you, because the proposition did accept this as a burden, especially when closing its extension. The second plank of it was we want to stop racism. And what we heard from the government member speak was we want to change perceptions. Okay, so does Miss Universe. But you don't change them. We think the problem with the extension is it was massively question begging. Obviously we live in a world where you cannot solve racism, where racist perceptions matter. No, thank you. How do we make that less important? Because Lauren was incredibly facile on this point. She was just of course the people in this think that racism is important. That's why they're changing their race. Of course, I think it's a racist and important in a different way. When you choose racism as something that's just like any other type of cosmetic surgery, just like changing your nose, just like getting bigger breasts, we think that fundamentally changes the conception of race. And they questioned our acceptance to this in the POI opening. But we think this is different, right? Because we think that what happened when you could change gender is that highlighted to everyone that gender was not something that was essentialized to people, that it was not something that provided them with a particular destiny. We think we do the same thing to race in this debate, and that's fundamentally important. And we think that the connection of an androgynous aesthetic culture drew from that point of saying that gender was something that proving that it wasn't subjective. But Stan told you about how the rhetoric of race is fundamentally undermined when we say that someone can just darken or lighten their skin and then move amongst that community without being noticed. It's a sign of the fact that race is purely just skin deep. Lauren thought she'd spotted a contradiction in our case. That how can you say that there are no harm to the external community if you also say these people are being beaten up based on race? No, that's not a contradiction. But furthermore, it shows why the upbenchers winning this debate, because we're minimising personal risk to that individual who perceives them as a victim of racism, but also minimising social risk to their community by changing the perception of race, throughout society. And we think that's something that's fundamentally important. What we think we do in this debate is we challenge racism and the rhetoric of racists. And that's fundamentally important. A social project the state should buy into. Rather than saying to people, we presume the motives for your change, we own your identity, we own your body, and we're going to use it for the interests of other people. We think race is a lie, and we think that you can only prove that by opposing this motion. I beg to oppose.